You know that friend who takes forever to make a decision? The one who's still thinking about it, still weighing it, still running every possible scenario through their head while everyone else has already moved on and made 3 more decisions since. Yeah, that friend isn't indecisive. They're not afraid of commitment. They're not wasting time. They're computing. If you're someone who can't send a text without rereading it 4 times, who lies awake mentally rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet, who has been called too much in your head more times than you can count, welcome. You're about to feel very seen. Because today we're breaking down the psychology of the overthinker, the one society calls indecisive, but science calls something else entirely. Here's the thing. While everyone else is deciding, the overthinker is processing. And there is a profound difference between those two things that nobody in your life has ever stopped to explain. You're not stuck. You never were. Your brain just refuses to move until it knows it's right. Let's kill the narrative that's been following you around. The one that says overthinking is a flaw, that it's self-sabotage with a sophisticated name, that the overthinker just needs to make a decision, take a breath, and get out of their own way. That narrative isn't just unhelpful, it's scientifically backwards. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Overthinking isn't a thinking problem, it's a depth problem. It's what happens when a mind calibrated for nuance, consequence, and complexity gets handed a world that rewards speed over substance and calls hesitation weakness. The overthinker wasn't built to skim the surface. They were built to go further than everyone else in the room, to see the angles, feel the weight, and process what others casually walk past. That's not a malfunction. That's a mind running exactly as designed. The world didn't misread your indecision. It misread your intelligence. So if you've ever made a simple decision feel like a dissertation, welcome. If you've ever rehearsed a conversation before it happened, then replayed it after, then wondered if the replay was even accurate, welcome. If someone has ever looked at you and said, "You're overthinking it," like that was helpful, like you hadn't already told yourself that exact thing 47 times, welcome. You're in the right place, and you're about to feel something the overthinker psychology almost never gets. Validated. Not managed. Not redirected toward a mindfulness app, actually validated by the science that explains exactly why your brain works the way it does, and why the very thing that exhausts you in everyday life is the same thing that makes you extraordinary in the right environment. Because the overthinker doesn't need to think less. The overthinker needs to finally understand what all that thinking is actually for. Today on Mentra Psychology, we're breaking down the psychology of the overthinker. Not the self-help version that ends with a 5-step checklist for quieting your mind. The real psychology, the neuroscience, the behavioral patterns underneath a mind that the world calls indecisive, but science calls something far more interesting. Because here's what the mainstream conversation always gets wrong about overthinker psychology. It treats the thinking as the problem. But the overthinker isn't broken. The overthinker is operating a cognitive system so layered, so detail-oriented, so relentlessly thorough, that the standard pace of everyday decision-making feels like being asked to write a novel in 30 seconds. Society calls the overthinker their own worst enemy. Science calls the overthinker one of the most cognitively sophisticated profiles in behavioral psychology. And by the time this video ends, you're going to stop apologizing for the way your mind works and start understanding exactly what it was built for. Here's where the psychology of the overthinker gets fascinating. Researchers at the University of Toronto studied a specific personality trait called need for cognition, the tendency to engage in and enjoy effortful thinking. And what they found dismantles everything the world has told the overthinker about themselves. People with high need for cognition don't just think more, they think better. They retain more information, make more accurate predictions, and demonstrate significantly stronger creative and analytical reasoning than their less reflective peers. And here's the psychological fact that should stop you completely. A study published in the journal Thinking and Reasoning found that chronic overthinkers consistently scored higher on measures of emotional intelligence, creative thinking, and long-term decision accuracy than people who decided quickly and instinctively. The overthinker doesn't make worse decisions. They make slower ones, with dramatically better outcomes. That's not a liability. That's a cognitive advantage the world keeps mislabeling as a personality defect. But the science only explains part of what's actually happening inside the overthinker psychology, because beneath the research, there's something more personal, more specific, something that doesn't show up in a study, but lives in the daily experience of every overthinker who has ever been told to just relax. Psychologists call it hypervigilance, a state of heightened alertness where the brain is constantly scanning for threat, consequence, and meaning. And in the overthinker, it doesn't switch off when the danger passes. And here's the part that reframes everything. That hypervigilance wasn't random. For most overthinkers, it was learned, built in environments where being wrong had real consequences, where missing something meant something, where paying close attention wasn't a habit, it was a survival skill. The overthinker didn't choose this wiring. They were shaped by a world that made it necessary. And here's the part of the overthinker psychology that nobody in your life has ever framed this way. The same brain that keeps you up at 2 a.m. is the same brain that sees what everyone else missed, that catches the problem before it becomes a crisis, that asks the question nobody else thought to ask, and finds the solution nobody else thought to look for. And here's the fact that should genuinely shift something in you. Some of the most transformative minds in human history were documented overthinkers. Darwin, Tesla, Einstein. People whose relentless internal processing wasn't despite their genius, it was the engine of it. The overthinker doesn't need a quieter mind. They need a bigger arena. Think about what society actually celebrates. The decisive leader who trusts their gut. The entrepreneur who moved fast and broke things. The person in the meeting who speaks first, commits instantly, and figures it out along the way. The just do it mentality that turns impulsiveness into a brand and calls it confidence. But here's what that culture never tells you. The fast decision and the right decision are not the same decision. And the environments that reward speed over depth, that mistake confidence for competence and momentum for wisdom, are the same environments that consistently miss the overthinker entirely. Not because the overthinker wasn't good enough, because the overthinker was playing a different game at a different depth than anyone around them was equipped to recognize. Your competition was never the person who decided faster. Your competition is the version of you that almost convinced yourself that thinking deeply was something to be ashamed of. Now, honesty matters here. Overthinking that goes unexamined doesn't always become a superpower. Sometimes it becomes paralysis, avoidance, a mind so consumed by every possible outcome that no outcome ever gets chosen. So ask yourself honestly, are you processing or are you hiding? Because one is the overthinker psychology working exactly as designed. The other is fear wearing the costume of preparation. You were never too much. You were never in your own way. You were always a mind looking for an environment worthy of everything it was carrying. Stop apologizing for how deeply you think. Start pointing it somewhere that deserves it. If this resonated, subscribe. The next video goes even deeper. Click it. You'll understand why.